I've never believed in ghosts, at least not until I went to Dead Woman's Crossing. As an investigative journalist, I'm used to scary stories. I've investigated haunted houses, ancient graves, and forgotten urban legends. But nothing could have really prepared me for what happened on that bridge. Dead Woman's Crossing isn't just a name. It's a place in Oklahoma that holds the tragic story of a woman named Katie DeWitt James. In 1905, she disappeared after traveling with a woman named Fannie Norton, known as the Wicked Woman. A few days later, Katie's body was found on the banks of Deer Creek. Her head had been bashed in with a blunt object, and her throat had been slit. But what's most terrifying isn't how she died, but what happened afterward. Locals believe that Katie's spirit still lingers there, walking the bridge every night searching for her missing baby. Many have reported hearing a woman's cries, seeing a faint shadow in the river, or feeling an invisible cold touch. I wanted to find out the truth. I wanted to see for myself if this legend was real, but I never thought that night would change my life forever. Because that night I saw him. I arrived in Weatherford, Oklahoma in the early afternoon. The small town seemed ordinary, a quiet main street, old houses with wooden porches, and a church with a large bell standing tall in the middle of town. I parked my car in front of an old diner. The air here felt heavy, as if the town was hiding something it didn't want to reveal. I went inside and ordered a coffee. When I mentioned Dead Woman's Crossing to the waitress, she froze for a moment. Her eyes met mine with a mixture of fear and suspicion. "You're not planning on going there, are you?" she asked in a low voice. I smiled a little. I was just curious, wanted to see if the story was true. An old man sitting in the corner of the diner approached. His eyes were cloudy, his skin wrinkled, and his hands shook as he set down his coffee cup. "Don't go there alone," he said softly. "Katie's still there, and she doesn't like outsiders to poke trouble." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean Katie's ghost?" He nodded slowly. "I saw her myself 20 years ago. She stood on the bridge crying, and then she just disappeared. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, but I remained skeptical. That night I drove to Dead Woman's Crossing, and everything changed. I stood in the middle of the bridge, surrounded by darkness. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the trees and the river flowing far below. I took out my camera and started recording. The first sounds I heard were footsteps, slow, rhythmic, as if someone was walking along the edge of the bridge. I turned around, there was no one there. Then a soft voice echoed through the night air. "Where is my baby?" My chest felt tight. It wasn't my imagination, I really heard it. I raised the camera, trying to find the source of the sound. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered before going out completely. In the darkness, I felt something. A cold breath on the back of my neck. I turned around quickly, and there she was. A woman in a wrinkled white dress, her face pale, her eyes blank, and blood drying on her neck. I couldn't move, and she started walking toward me. I couldn't move. The woman stood at the edge of the bridge, her white dress fluttering softly in the night wind. Her long, tangled hair covered most of her face, but I could see those empty eyes. Eyes that seemed to stare deep into my soul. My chest rose and fell, my breath quickened. But before I could do anything, she moved, not walking, floating, slowly approaching me. My heart pounded as the temperature around me dropped drastically. The air that had been just plain cold had now turned bone-chilling. The camera in my hand began to vibrate, the light flickered, and the screen showed static. Then she whispered, "Where is my baby?" The voice echoed in my ears as if whispered directly into my head. My fingers were numb. My feet felt heavy as if they were embedded in the wood of this bridge. But what was more terrifying The figure smiled. His pale, chapped lips curved slightly, but there was no warmth in the smile. It was an inhuman smile. And as he got closer, I realized something. Blood. There was a trail of blood on his neck. A gaping wound, as if someone had slit his throat almost to the point of severing it. My body finally reacted. I ran. I nearly tripped as I turned around, trying my best to run across the bridge. My breath was ragged, my head was spinning, but I didn't dare look back. But as my feet almost reached the edge of the bridge, something cold touched my shoulder. A hand gripped. I couldn't breathe. That hand, cold as ice, gripped my shoulder tightly. Pain shot through my body like thousands of needles were piercing my skin. His fingers were long, his nails cracked and sharp, gripping me tightly as if they wouldn't let me go. I wanted to scream, but my voice was caught in my throat. "Help me," the voice whispered, closer than before. I could feel his breath in my ear, even though he shouldn't be alive. Then the world around me changed. The bridge that had been empty was now filled with whispers. The faint sound of a baby crying could be heard in the distance, accompanied by the sound of footsteps behind me. But I knew I was alone. Slowly, I turned my head, and there behind the thick fog he stood, closer than before. His head tilted slightly, his blank eyes staring at me. His torn white dress was now more visible, the dried bloodstains on his stomach, as if someone had stabbed him there. Suddenly, he approached me in the blink of an eye. I screamed and fell to the ground. My camera was thrown to the side of the bridge, the lens cracked. The temperature around me dropped drastically, my breath forming thick mist in the air. Then another sound was heard. Not the sound of a baby crying, not even the whispers of spirits. The sound of laughter. Not human laughter. Not laughter full of happiness, but dark laughter. Laughter that contained despair, pain, and anger. He laughed. And as I tried to crawl away, he bent down, his face approaching mine. "I want my baby back." I closed my eyes, feeling the coldness enveloping my body. Panic made my head dizzy, I almost fainted. But suddenly the sound of a car horn was heard from a distance. Bright lights shone towards me, and when I opened my eyes, he was gone. I was still sitting in the car, my hands shaking. The horn had come from a passing truck, and it might have saved me from something worse. But one thing was clear. I couldn't stop now. I knew this story was more than just an urban legend. There was something real here, something that had lingered here for over a century. And if I didn't get to the bottom of it, I might never sleep peacefully again. I headed back to the motel. With shaking hands, I turned on my laptop and began searching through old files. The name Katie DeWitt James kept coming up in reports. A young mother who had been brutally murdered near a river in 1905. And what made my chest tighten even more, the killer was never convicted. The name that came up in many of the reports was Fanny Norton, a woman who allegedly took Katie to her final destination before she was killed. Fanny herself committed suicide shortly afterward, but rumor had it that she wasn't the real killer. I dug deeper, opening old records, reading yellowed police reports and online archives. The more I read, the more it became clear that something was being covered up. Then my laptop screen flickered. Suddenly my motel room grew colder. My breath formed a thin mist. There was someone behind me. I could feel it. Slowly I turned to the mirror in my room, and there she was, the image of Katie, standing behind me, her eyes blank, her hair a mess. Her face was scarred, her lips trembling as if she wanted to say something. But before she could speak, my motel room door slammed shut. My laptop died, the lights flickered, and the sound came again. A baby's cry. I felt like the air was being sucked out of the room. My head was spinning, my body was weak. But I realized something. She didn't want to scare me. She wanted me to hear. She wanted me to see the truth. With the remaining strength, I turned on my laptop again, searching for information that might reveal what really happened to Katie. And finally, I found it. An old article. In it, it was written that before her death, Katie was often seen meeting an unnamed man. A man who was believed to have had an affair with her, and perhaps the man was the father of her baby. The man was never found, or maybe he was deliberately hidden. Then the lights in my room went out completely, and in the darkness I heard the sound of breathing. You almost found her. Suddenly I felt something touch the back of my neck, something cold, something that lives among the world of the dead. I couldn't move. The air in the motel room felt heavy, as if something was pressing on my chest. The sound of breathing was still behind me, slow, heavy, like someone dying. I didn't dare turn around. "You almost found him." The whisper grew closer. I could feel its coldness touching my skin. Then suddenly, the window of my motel room shattered. Shards of glass flew in all directions, and in a split second I saw her clearly. "Katie!" She stood outside the shattered window, her hair flying in the night wind. Her blank eyes stared at me, and this time, she was crying. Black tears streamed down her cheeks, staining her tattered white dress. Then, without warning, her body was thrown into the room as if someone had pulled her from behind. She slammed to the floor in front of me, her body shaking as if she was enduring excruciating pain. I panicked. "Katie, what happened?" He looked up, and for the first time he spoke clearly. "He's still here." And before I could ask who he meant, the door to my motel room slammed open by itself. A cold breeze blew in, and from behind the door, there was someone standing there. Not a human, not even a ghost. The figure was tall, wearing a worn, dusty black coat. His face was barely visible under the shadow of his hat, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw his smile. A smile too wide to be human. "You're in too deep, kid." His voice was deep, like a distant rumble. Katie screamed. Her body was dragged backward, clawing at the wooden floor with shaking hands. It hit me. I had to do something. I reached for my camera on the table and flicked on the light. A bright light flooded the room, and in an instant the man was gone. Katie was gasping for breath, her hands shaking violently. I rushed to her, but before I could touch her, she began to fade. "Find him," she whispered softly. "Find him before he finds you." And in a matter of seconds, she was gone. The motel room was silent again. But I knew this wasn't over. Because on the shattered glass of the window, written in trembling letters, "He sees you." And just as I read the words, the motel room lights went out. I didn't sleep all night. After the incident in the motel room, I immediately packed my things and left there. But one strange thing, my car wouldn't start. The engine starts but won't start. It's as if something is holding me in this place. I was forced to stay another night, even though I knew it was the worst decision I had ever made. And that's right. At 3 a.m. I woke up to the sound of knocking on my motel window. Slow, rhythmic. I grabbed my cell phone and looked at the screen. No signal. When I looked at the window, there's no one. But when I breathed a sigh of relief, from inside the room, I turned around, and in the bathroom mirror I saw something that made my blood run cold. That man. He stood behind me, his wide smile even clearer in the mirror. His eyes were blank, his face expressionless except for that smile. But before I could move, he whispered something into my ear. "Now you are one of us." Instantly, all the lights in the motel room went off at once. The room plunged into pitch black, and in that darkness I saw other eyes peering from the corners of the room. It wasn't just Katie. It wasn't just the man. There were many of them. All the creatures who had been trapped in this place for over a century. All who had seen the truth. All who couldn't leave. And now I was one of them. I could never leave Dead Woman's Crossing. Not physically. But I knew even if I did get out of this place, they would follow me forever.